My name is Alara. In the suffocating, velvet-lined world of the Petrov National Theater, I was the ghost in the seams, the silent architect of a beauty I was never allowed to inhabit. For 20 years, I sat in a windowless workshop, stitching the complex period costumes and crafting the soul-crushing monologues that defined our family's prestige. But in the eyes of my parents and the critics, I was merely a technical necessity. My sister, Juliana, was the face, the radiant star who took the bows and the bouquets, while I unpicked the threads of her mediocrity in the dark. They forced me to surrender every script, every innovative design, and every creative spark to her name. The public wants a muse, Alara, not a seamstress with a pen, my mother had told me, her voice a cold blade of pragmatism. People want to worship a goddess, not the girl who washes her stockings. I was the brain, she was the brand. But they made a fatal error. They thought they could own the art without understanding the mechanics of the artist. They didn't realize that a play built on a stolen soul is a stage built on a trapdoor, and I was the only one who knew how to pull the lever. The smell of the Petrov Theater was a mixture of floor wax, stale champagne, and the bitter copper of my own exhaustion. It was opening night of The Golden Empress, the production that was supposed to secure our family's legacy for another generation. I stood in the wings, my hands raw from sewing 5,000 Swarovski crystals onto Juliana's bodice by hand. I watched her through the gap in the curtains. She was breathtaking, not because of her talent, which was thin and brittle, but because I had built her that way. I had sculpted her silhouette, coached her through the difficult vowels of the second act, and written the very words that were currently making the audience hold their breath. My mother, Clarissa, the artistic director, stepped up beside me. Her eyes were fixed on Juliana, the daughter who was currently inflating the family's social capital by 100%. "She's magnificent, isn't she?" Clarissa remarked, her voice devoid of any maternal warmth for the daughter standing next to her. "A true Petrov. The critics will call it a miracle." "I wrote that miracle, Mother," I said quietly, my voice barely audible over the swelling orchestra. "I spent 6 months in the archives researching the period. I wrote the monologues she's delivering right now. Juliana can't even remember her cues without me whispering from the prompt box." "Juliana is the asset, Alara." Clarissa turned to me, her gaze as hard as a stage weight. "You are the labor. We've discussed this. The credits are in her name to ensure the longevity of the theater. No one wants to hear that a masterpiece was written by a girl who spends her time covered in thread and dust. It complicates the marketing. Now, be a good sister and go prepare the wardrobe for the second act. She's the reason you have a roof over your head." The roof over my head felt like a tomb. 2 weeks later, the ceiling finally collapsed. I was called into the grand office, where the portraits of my ancestors seemed to judge me from the walls. Juliana was sitting in the velvet armchair, sipping tea and scrolling through glowing reviews. My father, Silas, stood by the window, looking out at the lines of people waiting to buy tickets for the show I had created. "Alara, we've decided to reorganize the production team. The foundation of the theater is solid now. We're bringing in a prestigious design firm from Paris for the next season. Your technical intensity, it's becoming a friction point for Juliana's creative process." "Friction point?" I laughed, the sound sharp and hollow in the ornate room. The fact that I'm the only one who knows the scripts are failing because you're cutting out the subtext, or the fact that the theater's debt is currently hidden behind 3 sets of books you can't even read? "The team can handle it. We've hired professional writers and stylists. They can maintain what you've built. Here is your severance. It's generous, provided you sign the final non-disclosure agreement regarding the creative origin of our plays." You're firing me from my own life? I stood up, my hands trembling with a rage that felt like a silent explosion. I built this world, Juliana. You're just a puppet in it. Actually, Ilera, Juliana said, finally looking up with a smirk of pure, unadulterated vanity. According to the legal filings, mother and father built this world. You were just the help. Now, please clear your workshop. Security will escort you out. We have a gala to attend in an hour. I walked out of the Petrov Theater with a single cardboard box and a secret that they thought they had buried. They had revoked my keys, yes, they had scrubbed my name from the playbills, certainly, but they had forgotten one fundamental truth about my writing. I never create a hero without giving them a fatal flaw. I sat in my small, cold apartment, watching the news. The Petrovs were being hailed as the saviors of the stage. Juliana was on the cover of Vogue. My mother was being nominated for a Lifetime Achievement Award. I didn't sue them. I didn't scream to the press. I knew the high society world. They would just see me as a jealous sister trying to steal Juliana's light. I knew the only way to win was to let the logic of their own greed do the work for me. I had already begun my transformation. I didn't just leave, I vanished. I spent my generous severance on a one-way ticket to London and a new identity. I wasn't the seamstress anymore. I was becoming the director of a play they couldn't even imagine. I was no longer Ilera Petrov. I was Iris Vane, and while they were busy playing their roles in a dying theater, I was busy writing the final act of their downfall. London was the perfect laboratory for my rebirth. It was a city that valued heritage but worshipped innovation, and I brought both. I took the generous severance package, the blood money my parents had paid me to vanish, and used it to fund a series of anonymous short films under the label Vane Global. I didn't put my face on them. I simply signed them with a stylized, minimalist V. Within 6 months, the V style became a viral sensation in the industry. Critics praised the uncanny attention to detail in the costuming and the surgical precision of the dialogue. They didn't know they were watching the revenge of a seamstress. I spent those years physically and mentally shedding Ilera Petrov. I cut my hair into a sharp, architectural bob that framed my face like a weapon and dyed it a shade of obsidian that made my eyes look like frozen steel. I traded my oversized sweaters for perfectly tailored minimalist suits, power armor for the boardroom. I wasn't dependable anymore. I was formidable. I learned the language of venture capital and international distribution, moving from the theater wings to the center of global cinematic production. By the second year, I had won 2 BAFTAs under my pseudonym, Iris Vane. I lived in a glass penthouse where the only reminder of my past was a single silver needle I kept in a display case, a relic of the girl they tried to bury. Meanwhile, I monitored the Petrovs like a hawk watching a dying animal. Without my scripts, their new productions were being torn apart by critics for being vapid and stylistically bankrupt. Juliana's star was fading fast. She was aging out of the ingenue roles I had designed for her, and she lacked the range to play anything else. My father was selling off family assets to keep the theater's doors open, while my mother's artistic direction was being mocked in the local press as a relic of a bygone era. Then came the move I had been preparing for. A major Hollywood studio announced they were looking for a visionary director for a $300 million blockbuster, a retelling of the very Empress story that my family claimed to own. It was the Petrov legacy on a global scale, and they were desperate to be part of it. My mother, Clarissa, flew to London to pitch Juliana for the lead. She didn't know that the studio's mysterious creative consultant, who had the final say on all casting, was none other than the daughter she had called Ordinary.
I sat behind a one-way mirror in a Soho boardroom as they walked in. My mother looked haggard, despite the expensive silk scarf she wore to hide the lines of stress. Juliana looked frantic, her eyes darting around the room, searching for a mirror. I watched them through the glass, sipping a cold espresso, feeling nothing but a professional, icy clarity. I could have stepped out then, but I wanted them to work for me. I wanted them to beg for the chance to be in a vain production, without realizing they were begging their own child for a lifeline. "The director has notes," the studio executive said, sliding a folder across the table. I had written those notes myself. They were brutal. I dismantled Juliana's previous performances, calling them surface level and lacking the grit of real experience. I saw my mother flinch as she read my words, the words of the expert she so desperately needed to impress. "The director is willing to consider Juliana Petrov, but only under a total control contract. The director oversees everything: wardrobe, script, even Juliana's public appearances for the next 2 years. And the Petrov Theater must be put up as collateral for the production's insurance." My father hesitated. He knew it was a gamble that could lose them their home, but my mother, blinded by the chance to see Juliana's name on a Hollywood marquee again, grabbed the pen. "We accept," she said, her hand trembling as she signed away the last of their independence. I watched her sign the contract on the monitor in front of me. She was handing me the keys to her kingdom, and she was smiling while she did it. As they left the room, I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the London skyline. The trap was set. They were coming to Hollywood to film the masterpiece they thought they had stolen from me. They thought they were coming for their triumph. They didn't realize they were coming to be dismantled, frame by frame, by the very ghost they thought they had silenced. The ordinary girl was gone. Iris Vane was about to call action.
The air in the soundstage was thick with the scent of high-grade ozone, expensive catering, and the silent, vibrating tension of a production that cost $5 million a day. I sat in the darkness of the Video Village, a fortress of monitors and cables, wearing a surgical mask and a headset that amplified every whisper on the floor. To my family, I was a silhouette in a black designer suit, a voice that came through their earpieces like a cold command from a higher power. They called me Director Vane with a reverence that bordered on fear, never once suspecting that the woman who now held their careers in her hands was the same girl they had once relegated to the basement. The first week of filming was a psychological siege. I had redesigned every costume for the Empress project, stripping away the gaudy sequins my mother favored and replacing them with heavy, restrictive fabrics that forced Juliana to move with a painful, stiff grace. Every time my mother tried to offer a suggestion on the set, I would silence her with a flick of my hand, without even looking in her direction. "The visual language of this film is precise, Clarissa," I said through the intercom, my voice distorted and modulated. "Your theatrical sensibilities are dated. Stay in the hospitality tent. The actors need air, not nostalgia." I pushed Juliana to the breaking point. I made her repeat a single 3-minute monologue, one I had originally written in tears 3 years ago, 64 times. I watched her through the 8K lens, every micro-expression of her frustration and inadequacy magnified on my screen. By the 40th take, her ethereal mask had shattered. She was sweating, her makeup was running, and for the first time in her life, she looked human. She looked like the character, a woman being crushed by the weight of expectations she could never meet. "It's not enough, Juliana," I said, my voice echoing through the studio speakers. "Stop trying to be beautiful. Stop trying to find the light. The light doesn't want you. The light is something you have to earn, and right now, you're just a shadow. Do it again,
and this time try to remember why you're so afraid of being ordinary. I saw my father, Silas, standing by the craft services table, looking at the contract he had signed. He looked older, his hair thinner, his eyes constantly darting to the production clock. He knew that every hour we went over schedule was an hour that put the Petrov Theater closer to foreclosure. I had structured the budget so that any delay caused by the creative talent, Juliana, would be billed directly back to their personal holding company. I wasn't just directing a movie, I was liquidating their inheritance in real time. One night, after a brutal 18-hour shoot, I stayed late in the editing suite. I was reviewing the footage when my mother walked in, uninvited. She didn't see me in the shadows of the ergonomic chair. She only saw the flickering images of her daughter looking broken on the giant screen. She walked up to the monitor and touched Juliana's face. "She looks so small," she whispered to herself. "I thought this would make her a queen. But this director, she's turning her into a victim." "The truth is often uncomfortable, Clarissa," I said, spinning the chair around. I kept my face in the dark, the brim of my cap low. "Miss Vane," my mother gasped, pulling her hand away. I didn't see you. I wanted to ask if we could soften the lighting for the ballroom scene. Juliana is exhausted. She doesn't look like a Petrov." Being a Petrov is exactly what's wrong with her performance. She's lived a life of stolen credit and unearned applause. I'm giving her something she's never had, a genuine emotion. If you want a soft focus fairy tale, go back to your dying theater. If you want a masterpiece, stay out of my room. My mother backed away, her eyes wide with a mixture of offense and a strange budding recognition she couldn't quite place. She looked at me, her mouth opening as if to say something, but the cold, professional vacuum of the room silenced her. She fled into the hallway, leaving me alone with the digital ghosts of our past. The filming wrapped 3 weeks later. I had everything I needed: the footage of Juliana's collapse, the signed deeds to the Petrov properties, and the absolute control over the final cut. I spent the next month in the editing bay, weaving a story that was a love letter to the invisible people of the world and a brutal satire of the dynasties that exploited them. The premiere was scheduled at the Chinese Theater in Hollywood. It was the most anticipated event of the year. My family had spent their last remaining cash on a publicist to ensure they were seen on the red carpet as the architects of the story. They thought this was the beginning of their global reign. They didn't realize that the limousine I had sent for them was a one-way trip to the end of their era. The ordinary girl was about to step into the light, and this time there would be no stitches left to hide the truth.
The Hollywood Boulevard was a river of liquid gold and flashing magnesium. Thousands of fans lined the barricades, their screams echoing against the historic walls of the Chinese theater. Giant digital billboards looped the trailer for The Empress, but it wasn't Juliana's face they were showing. It was the atmospheric, haunting imagery of the Vane style. My family stood on the red carpet, preening for the cameras. My mother wore a vintage Petrov gown, her chin tilted at an angle of practiced arrogance, while Juliana struggled to maintain her ethereal smile under the harsh glare of 1,000 lenses. They were giving interviews, claiming credit for the vision they had supposedly nurtured for decades. "We always knew this story belonged to the world," my mother told a reporter from Variety, her voice dripping with artificial grace. "The Petrov legacy is about excellence, about the sacrifice behind the art. Director Vane merely gave our family's soul a bigger stage." I watched them from the tinted window of my black limousine, parked just a few yards away. I had the legal documents in my lap, the final foreclosure notices for the Petrov Theater and the transfer of all intellectual property to Vane Global. They were celebrating on a graveyard they hadn't even realized they had dug. "It's time, Iris," my assistant whispered, handing me a glass of water. I didn't need the water. My throat was clear. I stepped out of the car. The silence didn't happen all at once. It rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. I wasn't wearing a costume. I was wearing a suit of midnight blue silk, tailored so sharply it looked like it could cut glass. My hair was a blade of obsidian, my eyes cold and steady. I didn't hide behind a mask or a headset anymore. I walked toward the center of the carpet, the flashes of the cameras becoming a solid wall of white light. My mother saw me first. She stopped mid-sentence, her hand frozen in the air. She looked at my face, then at my eyes, and I saw the recognition hit her like a physical blow. The ordinary daughter, the girl with the pins, the shadow she had cast out to protect her star. "Ilara?" she whispered, the word lost in the roar of the crowd. I didn't stop. I walked past the reporters, past the fans, and stood directly in front of them. Juliana looked as if she'd seen a ghost. Her lower lip trembled, the carefully applied lipstick smearing as she gasped. "My name is Iris Vane," I said, my voice amplified by the microphones of a dozen international news crews, "and I am the director of this film. I am the writer of every word you are about to hear, and as of 6 p.m. tonight, I am the sole owner of the Petrov National Theater and every asset attached to its name." The silence was absolute now. Even the photographers stopped clicking. You can't," Silas stammered, stepping forward. "The contract. We were partners." "Read the fine print, Father," I said, my voice a calm, lethal hum. "You sold the collateral for a chance at fame. You traded the foundation for the facade. You told me I was too ordinary for the light. It turns out the light was just waiting for someone who actually knew how to build the stage." I turned to the cameras, my back to my family. "This film isn't about an empress. It's about the people who stitch the gowns, who write the lines, and who are told they don't matter by the people who can't survive without them. Tonight, the shadows take their bow." The premiere was a slaughter. Every frame of the movie was a mirror held up to my family's greed. The audience wept, they cheered, and when the lights came up, they stood for a 10-minute ovation. I didn't stay for the after-party. I didn't stay to watch my mother plead with the lawyers or to see Juliana realize she would never work in this industry again. I walked out the stage door, just as I had 3 years ago. My limousine was waiting. As we drove away from the glowing lights of the theater, I looked at the digital billboard one last time. The Petrov name was gone. Only Vane remained. I opened my notebook and began to sketch a new design, not for a costume, but for my next world. I was no longer the seamstress, and I was no longer a ghost. I was the architect of my own reality, and the story was just beginning.